Bagus. Itu bagus. Yep, group project can be pretty messy, but we're figuring it out together. And this is how we learn, through teamwork and real-life problems.
Hey everyone, let's talk about something really cool and how we learn and how that connects us around world around us. Have you ever noticed that you learn best when you actually do something? Like baking a cake, you can read the recipe all day, but until you start mixing the ingredients, it just doesn't stick. That's basically what constructivism is all about. It's a learning theory that says we build our own understanding through experience and social interactions. We are not empty cup being filled. We are active builder of knowledge. Now, this whole idea didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was shaped by two brilliant minds, Jean Piaget and Lee Vygotsky. Let's start with Piaget. He was a Swiss psychologist who believed that children learn by exploring. He said we go through stages of development like solving puzzles when we are little and thinking more deeply as we grow. He introduced two important ideas: assimilations, fitting new info into what we already know, and accommodations, changing our thinking when something new doesn't quite fit. Then we have Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist who focused on the social side of learning. He believed we learn through conversations, guidance, and working with others. He came out with a zone of proximal developments, basically the sweet spot between what can you do alone and what you can do with a little help. So in simple terms, Piaget learning by doing, Vygotsky learning with others. Together, they gave us the heart of constructivism. Learning is personal, active, and social. And guess what? That same logic applied when we took at global politics too. But to really understand how constructivism works in international relations, we first need to understand its core concept. So let me pass it over to Danish, who will walk us through that part.
Thanks, Leah. That was super clear. So now let's break down the core concept of constructivism in international relation, anarchy, power, sovereignty, and norms. Now, don't worry, it might sound theoretical, but it's actually super relevant to understanding why countries act the way they do. So let's get into the first sub, anarchy. In international relation, anarchy doesn't mean total chaos. It just means there's no world government to keep everyone in check. Reality here, anarchy entering survival mode. Every country is on its own and conflict is always just around the corner. But constructivists, especially Alexander Wells, say anarchy is what state make of it. Let that sink in. The system may be the same, but it's the relation that matter. Think about the US and Canada. Peaceful neighbors, friendly ties, and shared norms. Now, think about the US and North Korea. Same international system, but full of suspicion and hostility. Lesson: anarchy doesn't cause behavior how state interpret it does. Now, let's talk about power. Most people think power is all about tanks, troops, and money. But constructivists flip the script. They say power can also be ideational, the ability to shape to value and what the world consider normal. This is where soft power comes in. If a country spread value like democracy or climate responsibility and others start adopting them, not because they're forced to, but because they believe in them, that's the real power. So yeah, missile matter, but so do ideas. Sovereignty is next. You hear it before, a country has the right control what happens within its border. But guess what? Even that idea is socially constructed. Constructivists argue that sovereignty only exists because other countries agree to respect it. It's not just a legal status, it's shared understanding. That's why when countries get independent like former colonial, it works when the international community recognizes them. And sometimes, sovereignty can be challenged like when human rights abuse happen and global norms say we can stay silent. Sovereignty then isn't set in stone, it involves with our values. Finally, let's hit norms. Norms are the unspoken rule of the international system. what's seen as okay or not okay. For example, after World War II, respecting human rights became a global norm. Countries might still break those rules, but they rarely admit it. Why? Because being seen as a legitimate matters. Even powerful states care about their image, and when enough countries believe in a norms, whether it's about nuclear weapons, gender equality, or environmental protection, it starts a shape behavior without a single law being passed. That the power collective belief. So, what the takeaway here? Constructivism challenges us to look beyond weapon and traits. It said the world isn't built by stuff, it built by meaning, by what we believe, by how we interact, and by the story we tell about ourselves and others. The biggest lesson, international relations aren't fixed, they're fluid. And that means change is always possible. If we change the way we think, thanks for turning in. Stick around, next up, Side Harif will dive into the real world strength of this theory and why it's matter now more than ever.
Thanks, Miza. That's really set the stage. Now let's sorry. Thanks, Miza. That's really set the stage. Now let's look at how constructivism actually play out in the real world events, starting with one of the most dramatic moments in history, the end of the Cold War. You might think it ended because of one side had more weapons or money, right? But constructivism gives a different lens. It wasn't just about power, it was about changing mindset. From 1985 to 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev stepped up as the leader of the Soviet Union, and like I just say, he showed up thin up. He started seeing the US not as enemy, but as a potential partner. He introduced Glasnost, which means openness, encouraging transparency and free discussion, and Perestroika, or restructuring, to modernize the economy and government. This reform changed not just policy, but how the Soviet Union saw itself and how the world saw them. That shift in identity, it made the US feel less threatened. As such grew, we saw armed control day, reduced tension, and eventually a peaceful end to the Cold War. This is constructivism in action. And identities matter just as much, if not more, than tanks and treaties. Now, let's talk about another big idea, non-diffusion. Imagine a world where countries don't use chemical weapons, not just because it's illegal, but because they truly believe it's wrong. That's actually what we've seen. After the 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention, most countries banned them, but it wasn't just about law. It was about a global belief that these weapons are inhuman. So where did that belief come from? From activists, NGO, international organizations like the UN and the OPCW, who spread the idea that chemical weapons aren't just dangerous, they're morally unacceptable. Over time, states didn't just follow the rule, they internalized them. They avoid chemical weapons because it became part of their identity as responsible global citizens. Now, how cool is that? Let's take it one step further with human rights advocacy. Constructivism helped explain how ideas like human dignity become global priorities, not just through law or pressure, but through shared value. Groups like Amnesty International and brave individual journalists, activists, everyday people exposed abuse and fought for justice. Their effort created real change, not just in policy but in perception. Even leaders who don't fully follow human rights standards still want to appear like they do. That shows how deep this value have taken root. So, what does this all mean? Constructivism reminds us the world doesn't only change the true force, it changes through idea, belief, and identity. And sometimes those things are even stronger than power. Now, I will pass to Jannah for further explanation.
Thanks, Sid. That was a solid overview of how constructivism can explain major global shifts. But now, let's flip the coin. While constructivism gives us deep insights into the power of ideas, it also has its limitations, especially when it comes to practical application and predicting outcomes. Yes, constructivism is super engaging and encourages us to learn, but like any theory, it's not perfect. Let's break it down. First, constructivism doesn't really help us predict things. What does that mean? Well, imagine you are teaching a class and you are trying to guess how each student will respond to a new topic. Behaviorists might predict that if you give them a quiz, they will show measurable results.
Well, a cognitive theorist might say they will process information step by step, but a constructivist, they would say, well, it's depend on their prior knowledge, their experience, their environment. Which sound thoughtful, but not so helpful if you are trying to plan a lesson or predict how students will perform. In short, constructivism is great at explaining what already happened, but not so great at telling us what will happen next. Second weakness is lack of structure. This theory is kind of like a choose your own adventure. Different scholars interpret in different ways. There is no single solid model. It's more like a loose collection of ideas than a strict rule book. Its flexibility is cool, but it also makes things confusing. If everyone is using different definition of knowledge or experience, how do we compare results? How do we measure success? How do we even know if it's right or wrong? So basically, it's hard to measure, hard to test, and hard to use consistently. So to sum it up, constructivism is awesome for understanding how learning and interaction shape behavior, but it's not great at predicting what will happen. And it doesn't have a strong structure, which makes it tricky to use in a consistent, measurable way. Just like baking a cake without a clear recipe, you might get something unique, or you might end up with a big mess. Thanks for listening, and now I will pass it over to Afiq. We will share some application of constructivism in action.
Thanks, Jannah. Now we are going to take a look at what type of constructivism application in real life that we might not wear around us. So take a look at the creation of the United Nations in 1945 after the horror of World War II, and countries come together to create the United Nations, and over 70 million people had died, cities was destroyed, and global peace was shattered. People in government realized that we can let this happen again, and they believe in the new ideas like human rights, peace, and the global cooperation. Countries act based on a shared belief and not as a military need, and they created a global rules because they believe in peace and unity. That share a belief change how the world works, and constructivism help explain how people, countries, and leaders change their behavior based on belief, ideas, and shared meanings. But of course, if you want to take a view in a simple daily life interaction, the constructivism is also applied in a task like a group project in a school or university. Instead of just a teacher and lecturer just doing a lecturing, you work in a group to brainstorming together, like discussing about the syllabus or developing a solution for the assigned problems. So the concept of student is learning of doing using their ideas, learning from others, and applying what they already know.
So what's a big deal about constructivism?
It shows us that the world isn't just built by law or power, but people, belief, and ideas.
It helps explain why countries act the way they do and how identify and values can change everything.
From classroom teamwork to international peace talk, how we see each other make all the difference.
And remember, constructivism reminds us the change doesn't just come from outside force, but from now how we choose to think and act. Thank you for watching. We hope you see constructivism in your life. Bye bye.